What up guys, Miguel here of YugaTech, and the Vivo S series has always been about defining style, finding new ways to present smartphone aesthetics, and encapsulating the whole thing in a budget-friendly package. This is the S1 Pro. It trades in circles and squares for diamonds, but is it enough to earn a spot in your pockets? Let's find out.
I just need some closure, a little closure.
Starting off with design, like I said earlier, the S1 Pro trades circles and squares for diamonds. To be more specific, I'm talking about this diamond-shaped camera module here at the rear placed on the upper center. Vivo's marketing material claims that it was jewelry that inspired the overall design language of this device, and I guess that's most true with the fancy sky colorway. What we have here is the S1 Pro in night black. It definitely looks classy with a little fun thanks to these red accents. Primarily, the device is clad in glass paired with a metallic frame, and that adds a nice feel to its diamond aesthetic. In front, it utilizes a dewdrop notch that houses the selfie shooter with relatively thin bezels. The S1 Pro, like most devices released this year, utilizes an in-display fingerprint scanner. And the truth is, Vivo has really incorporated this diamond aesthetic all over the device. Like, the charging animation is a diamond. I mean, if they really wanted to cash in on this, they could have made the notch diamond shape too. But, oh well. For buttons and ports, starting at the top, we can find a noise-cancelling mic for loudspeaker as well as a 3.5mm audio jack. Situated on the right are the volume rocker and red accented power button. On the left, we can find a hybrid dual SIM card tray. And lastly, at the bottom, we can find the main microphone for regular calls, a USB Type-C port, and a single downward firing speaker. For display, the S1 Pro features a 6.38-inch Full HD Plus Super AMOLED panel with a resolution of 2340 by 1080. We don't get any Gorilla Glass protection on this device, so users might want to preserve the already installed screen protector provided. When it comes to media consumption, this Super AMOLED panel is really nice. Users can enjoy watching their favorite movies and shows with good contrast, vibrant colors, and deep blacks. Viewing under direct sunlight is manageable and okay, so I think the panel could be a bit more bright in the next iteration. For the audio coming from the single downward firing speaker, it can get moderately loud with minimal lows and highs. Mids are very present on this guy. It's basically the only thing it's got for it, if I'm being honest. For hardware, under its panels, it sports a Qualcomm Snapdragon 665 coupled with an Adreno 610 GPU. It's a pretty average chipset at this point, though we never experienced any lags or delays when it came to multitasking between apps and regular web browsing. The S1 Pro gets 8GB of RAM and 128GB of internal storage, with expandable storage of up to 256GB. For software, we get Android 9 Pie skin with FunTouch OS 9.2 on top. Now, FunTouch is a pretty heavy skin atop Android, and it really isn't one of our favorites. Stuff like the notification panel and stock camera app really gets on our nerves here in the office, but I'm sure Vivo fans are definitely used to these things by now. Not to mention, our comments on user interfaces do sum up to being subjective like design. Now, for those of you interested in our benchmark scores, I'll have them flash on screen now. In terms of biometric security, this device gets fingerprint and face unlock. The fingerprint scanner is an optical in-display one, and it's pretty fast. It takes about half a second to unlock the device, though it still isn't as fast as a really good conventional scanner. The face unlock, on the other hand, is pretty snappy, though it can slow down in more challenging lighting conditions. For battery, the S1 Pro gets a 4500 mAh cell that supports 18-watt fast charging. Charging this device takes about an hour to fill up with the included brick. In our standard video loop test, which entails the phone being in airplane mode, its brightness and volume set to 50%, and with headphones plugged in, the S1 Pro got us a total of 21 hours and 52 minutes of playback. Now for the cameras. At the rear, that diamond camera module is a quad camera setup composed of a 48MP main shooter, an 8MP ultra-wide, a 2MP dedicated macro sensor, and a 2MP depth sensor. On the front-facing side of things, in the notch resides a 32MP selfie shooter. Alright, let's check out some samples. So all these photos before you were taken on the default photo mode. In terms of post-processing, the S1 Pro takes some decent photos. Some of you might not like the aggressive processing from the AI scene identifier. Luckily, users can switch that off in the settings menu. In a general sense, photos taken on the S1 Pro come with a pretty average amount of dynamic range with average focusing speed and sharpness. I noticed that depending on the lighting conditions, the camera shutter can take a while to shoot the image, which was a bit annoying. Highlights can come off blown out most of the time, and color reproduction from this thing really isn't the most faithful either. For portrait mode, subject background separation's pretty good. Still not perfect though, and because of that slow shutter speed I mentioned earlier, sometimes subjects can appear out of focus because the camera took a little long. For portrait selfie, subject background separation is about just as good as the rear, and again, like I mentioned with the default samples, highlights can appear blown out at times, so users might want to dial down the exposure before shooting. For actual selfies, image quality seems to be quite top-notch. The 32 megapixel sensor can take selfies good enough for social media posts, and hey, I'm not complaining. For macro mode, this device does have a dedicated sensor for it, and it could also be a bit better. Users need to remember that ample lighting should be available when using this sensor, but even the focusing distance with this sensor is a bit subpar compared to a dedicated macro sensor from Xiaomi. For video, the S1 Pro can shoot up to a resolution of 1080 at 30 frames per second. That's the sample you guys are viewing right now. Stabilization has room for improvement, and picture quality is about the same as its stills. So to wrap this review up, the Vivo S1 Pro retails locally for 15,990 pesos. It's a pretty capable mid-ranger with a great display for media consumption, a pretty average chipset, good battery life, and okay cameras. The S1 Pro only has one RAM and storage configuration, that's 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, and it's capable of expandable storage. So, are you guys thinking of copying a Vivo S1 Pro? Let us know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smack that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that bell icon so you get notified of future uploads. Be sure to visit YugaTech.com for the latest tech news and reviews. Again, this has been Miguel, and I'll see you in the next one.